and welcome to Smart Home Buying with the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership. My name is Francie Slater, and I'm here today with Jim Wild, the Executive Director of the Housing Partnership of 27 years. That's a pretty incredible stint, Jim.
Yes, I thought it was going to be 2. It's a jumping off point to something else, and it turned into my vocation, and I love it.
That's amazing. So I'm here today to learn more and discuss what the Housing Partnership does and kind of why housing is important. And just to take a step back and fully disclose, I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership, and I'm also a participant. I went through Project Genesis about 10 years ago, or maybe 11 years ago, before we bought our house here in Lowell. So I have a personal experience and much gratitude for what the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership does. And now getting to work on the board, seeing kind of an inside view of that, it's really fascinating work and such important work. And we'll get to talk about a lot of the issues here today. So.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks, Francie. And it is wonderful to have Francie on the board, having been gone through the classes. And also, I'd like to commend you for your work with Mill City Grows. When you think about over the past 8 years, what you all have accomplished is pretty phenomenal. And we're kind of in similar fields. I mean, we work in getting people into housing, which is so basic to so many other things in life. And you work with people in having people eat well and be healthy. So between eating and sleeping, we've got it covered.
We're trying to cover all those basics. And that's a great lead-in because, we oftentimes take housing for granted. It's for many of us, luckily, we have a place to go and keep our belongings and have a roof over our heads and feel safe and sound. But for many other people, that's not the case. So can you just start us off by giving us kind of a big picture of what's so important about housing? What's the big deal with housing?
Okay, home ownership specifically is so vital to so many parts of life. When you really think about the links between people who own their homes and have stable, affordable, sustainable living, and think about the links that tie to education, for example. Children who grow up in homes that are owned typically have higher graduation rates. They have lower teenage pregnancy rates. Think about the connections to health. The children that grow up in homes that are owned typically have lower rates of asthma and things like that. So when you think about all the other reasons about people jumping around and being intransient and not having the psychological well-being of knowing that you're in your own home and that this is predictable and all of that. Another big connection is civic engagement. People who own their homes have much higher likelihood of showing up to vote or being involved with their community and therefore controlling their own destiny in a lot of ways. So
it all makes so much sense that when a person and a family is rooted in place, they're more likely to thrive.
And it has financial benefits as well because they have the ability to build equity. As they live in their house and pay down their mortgage, they can build wealth and own their home, which is so helpful in terms of so many other aspects of life, in terms of being able to afford education or other things. So homeownership is such a vital part of our social fabric.
Yeah, that's amazing. And when we think about home ownership, obviously there's a long history in this country of ownership of property, of land, of wealth, and home ownership kind of sits squarely within that history. What is the context? What's the landscape, so to speak, of home ownership in this country, and what are we working with or against in the work at the partnership?
Okay, there are a lot of blemishes with our history with home ownership. I mean, when you think about the barriers to home ownership along racial lines, I mean, for decades in this country, people were excluded from home ownership by the federal government. HUD programs, FHA programs were only available to white families for decades. And banks were doing redlining back in the day. And that's when they would actually take a map, put it on the wall, draw a red line, and say, we'll do loans in this area, but not here. And so when you think about the collective, we have a legacy of inequality that's been caused by these barriers. Now, fortunately, things have changed in a lot of ways. Fortunately, we have the Community Reinvestment Act, which was a federal law that was enacted 41 years ago, which requires lenders to make loans in all the areas where they take deposits. And so, and things like redlining were banned. The Fair Housing Act, which went into effect in 1968, prohibited discrimination in housing. So we're definitely on the right track. We now have, today if someone's buying a house, they can get into the house with a much smaller down payment. 3 to 5% down payment is common for a lot of first-time homebuyers. Back before these rules changes, you needed at least 20% down payment.
Wow.
If that were the case today, I mean, so many more people would be excluded. So we've made a lot of changes. We're on the right path. However, because of the decades of people being left out and excluded, there's a whole lot of catching up that still needs to be done.
Yeah.
But places like Lowell, I mean, we're making a huge difference in that.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about redlining. It's definitely I see the continuation of that into, as we were talking about, other basic need areas like food. We see that those kinds of lending practices and that kind of discrimination playing out in food access, and the fact that low-income neighborhoods are less likely to have grocery stores in them. And that means residents have less access to fresh food, healthy food. They're mostly relying on convenience stores, fast food, liquor stores, gas stations for their basic food needs. And that underinvestment in neighborhoods and all the the way that you talk about homeownership building health, education, community investment and involvement, by stripping home ownership from residents of certain neighborhoods, it really is undermining that entire neighborhood's opportunity to grow and thrive and be healthy, both on an individual basis and a community basis. So it's really interesting to think about all those threads kind of weaving together, and the legacy that we're still living in so many cases of these past practices of discrimination and exclusion.
Right, but think about where we are now. I mean, Mill City Grows is thriving in the city. There are so many community gardens and farmers markets and educational tools. I mean, it's changing lives. And then, in the work of the collective work of the Housing Partnership over the years, we've helped hundreds of first-time homebuyers, buy houses and set down roots and start on the right track. So, I mean,
It's remarkable.
Yeah, it is, and it's so wonderful to be part of it.
It really is. It really is. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about kind of the national statistics of kind of where do we, now that policies have changed, we've become a lot more aware of the impacts of discrimination kind of globally on communities. Where are we statistically? Where are the numbers shaking out as far as home ownership goes? Okay,
across the country, about somewhere between 63 and 64% of all Americans own their own home.
Wow.
But that's overall. But within the white community, it's about 75%. Within the African community, the Asian community, and Hispanic communities, it's 40, 45, 50%.
So there's still a big gap.
There's still a big gap, and those things are being addressed, but there's a lot of catching up to do.
Sure. So even those policies that may be decades old, we're still seeing those repercussions living out today.
Right, and we're still seeing people that qualify for better mortgages than what they're actually getting. I mean, when you look at some of the really special mortgage products, the Mass, here in Massachusetts, we have the Mass Housing Partnership MHP1 program. We have mass housing loans, and you look at who's getting those loans, or just loans in general. How the interest rates work for depending on who is applying for them. There's still, even though people have the right intentions, there are still inconsistencies where people are still sometimes getting, the mortgage crisis that we went through 11 years ago in 2008,
Right.
severely hit, lower income communities.
Sure.
And so there's still a lot of catching up to do.
The fact of the matter is, if you can rent, you can own.
The money is going toward me instead of somewhere else, and I'm getting equity, and it's just, the feeling is great just to be a homeowner.
So we were just talking about housing and particularly home ownership in America and some of the issues and barriers to becoming a homeowner, and specifically some of the issues and barriers aligning with race, income level, where you live. And so this really brings us back to home, literally, with the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership. And our mission is to promote responsible and sustainable home ownership opportunities for low and moderate income earners by producing comprehensive training and counseling, as well as promoting the use of special mortgage products and down payment assistance programs. And so the big part of that is educating potential homeowners. Can you talk a little bit about why education matters in this process of buying a house?
Sure. That's a long mission statement. We've talked about shortening it, but it says everything. Homebuyer education is so vital to properly preparing people to buy a house. Buying a house is complicated. There are a lot of moving parts. There's, no matter who you ask, everybody has an opinion. And when someone decides that they're going to buy a house and everybody comes out of the woodwork and starts telling them their experience, things change. Buying a house 5 years ago is different than what it is today, and very different from 15 or 20 years ago. So providing really basic, comprehensive training from A to Z about how to buy a house is so vital for people to get prepared for the process and set the stage.
I can really, that resonates strongly with me, because I remember going into home buying. I was a young nonprofit professional at the time. My husband is an artist. We never really saw ourselves as homeowners, especially at a younger age. And when we realized, maybe we could actually buy a house here in Lowell and we could afford it, it seemed so daunting even to start the process. And it's a huge it's a huge purchase. It's the largest purchase most people will ever make in their lives, that significant amount of money, and to get a loan for that significant amount of money, it's daunting, to say the least.
It is, and I really empathize with the students, the people going through our classes all the time, watching them, go through, and it's so rewarding to be able to give people really solid advice and tell them what to do, what not to do, and all. In the classes, we spend the whole first night 2.5 hours. The whole course is 10 hours long. The first 2.5 hours we explain who everybody is, who are all the professionals, and what's their role, how they're paid, who they work for.
Mm. That's so important, getting that transparency of, who works for who and who answers to what, and just understanding how the threads all connect.
And their role, there's a lender, there's an attorney, there's a home inspector, there's an appraiser, there's an insurance person, all lots of people.
Yeah.
And there's a buyer and a seller.
Right.
And so, and everybody has a different role. We also talk about the process. What do you do from first you take a class, then you get pre-qualified for a mortgage, you get your financing lined up. And a lot of it's not intuitive, because when people decide to have that aha moment and wake up and say, okay, I'm ready, they go to an open house.
Right,
and they
the first
don't
thing
know their price range. They don't know
Right.
what they're qualified to borrow. And
Right.
so, getting all your financing lined up way in advance is really helpful. And then that brings in the whole budgeting, getting your own personal finances, together.
In order, yeah.
In order. We spend a lot of time
It's a
talking
huge
about
process.
budgeting. How do you track your expenses? How do you really assess how you spend your money and put together a realistic household budget?
And coming from renting into homeownership, there's a lot of different and new expenses that people may not anticipate. And I remember from the classes and from working, on the financial counseling side that, you guys were so thorough of really thinking about, well, you're going to have to buy brooms and vacuum cleaner and hoses and all, ladders, all these things that just don't come to mind. But all of a sudden, you're responsible for the maintenance and upkeep and, everything that is under that roof and on that property. And there's a lot of additional costs to that. There's also a lot of benefit to all of that and the equity that you're building in that. But I think being realistic about, what the responsibilities that you're walking into are, that was so wonderful and helpful.
Property taxes, water, sewer bills,
right?
Things like that.
All the costs that as a renter, you may not see those coming out, in the rent itemized, but are definitely there.
So it's we help people really figure out their finances and be prepared. Another big part of it is building credit history. People's credit history is a big determinant about what kind of mortgage they'll qualify for. And so, we pull in the classes, we pull people's credit for them, and we go over the scores with them and help them figure out, what they need to, if they have issues that need to be addressed, or how to build, or how to create new positive credit history. So, budgeting, credit, big issues, and then a lot of it is just the process. So who to hire. And I think one of the overwhelming principles that we talk about in the class a lot, the themes, is the importance of building the right team.
Building the right team. I still think about you standing up in front of the class and saying, you have to build your team. And that was a huge part of it, though, was feeling confident that the people who were part of our team of, realtors, lawyers, mortgage brokers, et cetera, that they were trustworthy people, that they were people that we felt comfortable with, that we didn't worry that they were taking us for a ride or just trying to squeeze money out of us, and that these were people who were vetted and invested in supporting a community.
Yeah, so important to have the right team. And because we always use the analogy to a sports team. At the beginning of the season, everybody has to be in place and ready to execute at 100%. It's not so you make an offer, then you go figure out where you're going to get your financing, then you have to stop and figure out where am I going to get my insurance, and you're always playing catch up, and you're not really thinking through these decisions. But putting the whole team together, once your team is together, people eliminate 90% of the problems that they come up with, because they're working with people with good products, good reputations, honest. And in this market, it's particularly with the real estate brokers, you need to have someone that's on top of their game.
There's clearly a lot of benefit and need for education. Can you give us kind of an overview of, how did Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership launch into this role of providing this amazing service? Where did we come from? What's our origin?
Well, I've been with the organization for 27 years, and I joined when it was 6 years old, and I had been working as developers. We built 3 housing complexes and sold all the units off to first-time home buyers.
Wow.
Then in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the real estate market took a big collapse down, similar to what we again went through in 2008. And so at that time, as an organization, we had to figure out how do we address our mission without actually building housing, because it costs more to build it than you could sell it for, which even as a nonprofit, that doesn't make sense. No. So we just started sort of in a vacuum to let's try some education and some type of program. So we started doing these home buyer training classes at the public library, and then after doing that for about a year, we discovered that there were some other people out there doing it. There was a group in Dorchester, Mass Affordable Housing Alliance, that was doing this. So we connected with them and compared notes and came up with best practices, and we do this and how do you do that, and before you know it, it evolves, and there's about 40 different homebuyer counseling agencies in Massachusetts.
Wow.
And we formed a collaborative, and we worked a lot together. I actually chaired the committee that put together the curriculum for all these agencies. It was
great.
a year-long effort, and we had we put together the first big thick curriculum for how do you teach a homebuyer training class and what do you cover in it.
Wow.
And then we formed, we have a selection committee, we have a seal of approval, we have, so it's basically an accreditation process.
Great.
And it involves, following a code of ethics, having a curriculum, and then we get monitored every 2 years and apply for renewals, and also the whole industry has evolved.
Yeah, a lot of vetting and
a lot of vetting.
Accountability built in.
Yep, and
That's
it's
important.
for me it's been great because I've been serving on the selection committee since it was formed. It's re-elected every 2 years, and I have been able to watch the quality and the consistency of homebuyer education throughout Massachusetts just steadily increase. So it's really become a quite an industry.
That's great. And we're leaders in that industry.
We're doing it.
Right here in Lowell.
Because not only a first-time home buyer, but being a first generation home buyer, didn't really know what the process was or what the details involve, and kind of the team that you need to assemble to kind of take on this process and project.
And then as you go through the class itself, and then you go through the inspection, or you're looking at the houses, you keep a lot of information in the back of your mind, so you know what questions to ask, and you know how to approach the process.
So when we left off, we were talking about Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership's origin, where we came from, and what we've been able to accomplish in 33 years. But can you quickly give us an overview? What are the services? What's the track record? What does the organization do?
Okay, sure. There's well, first of all, people think we're bigger than we are. We have 3 full-time employees.
Small but mighty team.
Mighty is mighty.
Yes.
We have Kathy Mercado, who is a coordinator of our down payment assistance programs, who's really wonderful. And Ed Alcantara, who's our home buyer counselor, has been with us for about 12 years and individually counsels people. And so, and I do TV shows with Francie. But anyhow, so we have 3 basic services. The first is homebuyer training. We do about 24 sets of classes every year. The courses are 10 hours long. We do them in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Khmer. We work with CMAA to do the Khmer classes. And we've had about 18,000 families go through the classes over the years. So we do the education, and then we also do the counseling. So after people finish the classes, they can meet with our homebuyer counselor, Ed Alcantara, who is terrific at counseling people. And those are about 2-hour sessions, and he reviews all of their personal financial situations and helps them figure out what they need to do to become mortgage ready. When they are ready, what are the better mortgage products for them to seek out, and all of that. And everybody's situation is different. And if you follow Ed's advice, you will become a homeowner. He does tough love, just telling you.
I can vouch for that.
So,
He's very good at his job. He gets you to your end goal.
Yeah. And then we have Kathy, who does processes the down payment assistance application. So if you're a first-time home buyer buying in Lowell, we have 2 programs that are available. One is funded by the City of Lowell, and the other one is funded by the Lowell Development Financial Corporation. And between those programs, one offers up to $11,800, and the other one offers $5,000 towards your down payment for your closing costs. So those are that's pretty much our programs.
Those are great. And that number, 18,000 people, that's phenomenal. And there's another statistic that I've heard as an impact of the housing partnership, that just since 2000 alone, a minimum of 1 in every 14 homes purchased in Lowell was purchased by a graduate of our programs.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing.
That's amazing.
We've had a history of great relationships with UMass Lowell and having interns with us. And we've had, over the years, we've had about 3 different studies that have been done with UMass interns. One of them produced that statistic, and along with that was we looked at all the purchase activity in the City of Lowell from the year 2000 through the year 2016. So over that period, 1 out of 14 homes was purchased. We know that it's actually probably higher, but that's what the information that we had. The other statistic that's particularly impressive is that if you look at all of the default rate on all mortgages, all houses in the City of Lowell during that time period, 5.6% of all the houses at some point were in default on their mortgages. And if you look at...
And is that in line with the national or the state average?
It's probably a little bit higher than the national average. But a lot of that was filtered, a lot of that was affected by the 2008 housing crisis.
Sure.
And but the thing when you look at just the people who went through our homebuyer training class and purchased in Lowell, the overall default rate was 5.6%. For those who went through our class and bought a house, the default rate was 1.6%.
Wow.
Astronomically lower.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So the proof is in the numbers that our graduates are prepared.
Mm-hmm.
They can weather these storms of crises and high foreclosure rates. They're staying in their homes because they're prepared.
And it really
That's
shows
amazing.
they made the right choices up front. They weren't
Right.
subjected to predatory lenders. They
Didn't spend beyond their means. They had the right support systems, and that's incredible.
Yeah, it's so gratifying to see that.
That's amazing. So I know that we both share a strong love for this community as Lowell residents and participants in community activities. And one of the reasons that I love Lowell so much is because we have an incredible population here of people from around the world, the diversity, the culture. It's just such an amazing place to live. And so you mentioned that the classes are delivered in a few different languages. Can you talk a little bit more about how our cultural diversity of Lowell is represented in the programs?
Sure. It's always been very important to us to make sure that the participants in our classes reflect very closely the community in general, and we're really happy to show that they are. Another study that a UMass student did for us was 2 students worked on this for quite a while, but we looked at the time period 2013 through 2018, so for a 6-year period. We looked at all the demographics of the people who went through our classes. During that time period, about 3,200 families went through the classes. And the statistics that we discovered were that greater than 50% of those earned 80% or less of the area median income. 38% of all of our graduates were born outside of the United States, and 50% were non-white. So we're really very closely reflecting the community.
Right.
And I think we're really bucking national trends.
Right.
And it's
Absolutely. Especially
and it's
the historical
unbelievably
trends.
rewarding to see.
Yeah. And on top
Yeah.
of that, I remember that study saying that 40% of the grads who went on to purchase homes were people of color.
Mm-hmm.
So again, kind of looking back at those stats, that we are helping people who have historically been excluded from home ownership get into homes
Right.
in a sustainable way.
And we do a home buyer with the month profile all the time, so it's wonderful to go into the homes and talk to the families. And I interviewed a young couple last night for an upcoming profile, and a young couple who was 25 and 22 years old, purchased their first house. Unbelievable. I mean, so responsible, so
Yeah.
and they have a whole life ahead of them of
Yes.
having their own home, building equity, stability.
That's amazing.
It's so rewarding.
So how do people get involved?
The easiest way is to go to our website, mvhp.org, and you can register for the classes right through our website, or people can call the office or flag us down on the street. We're
Are you always wearing that shirt?
always wearing this shirt.
So we can spot you.
Right.
Well, great, Jim. Thank you so much for spending
Thank you,
this time
Francie.
today.
It was great to talk to
It was
you.
great. Thank you for joining us today for Smart Home Buying with the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership. Stay tuned. We'll have a lot more episodes coming soon with great practical tips for how you can purchase your own home.